So we're starting here on page 14, and I would start actually this sentence with cum. So this is cum plus subjunctive, fremerent, which means when something was happening. So when, and then the subject is actually multi, many people. So when many people were murmuring or muttering, fremerent, and then I would go here, adversus injuriam decreti, against the injustice of the decree. So adversus plus accusative means against. When many were murmuring against the injustice of the decree, magis quam, rather than, quisquam unus, any one person, or anyone alone, daring, auderet, to reject it, recusare. So the situation is that lots of people are sort of muttering quietly against the decree, but none of them is bold enough to actually speak out. So when that was going on, Publius Numitorius, puellae avus, the grandfather of the girl, et sponsus Icilius, and her fiancé Isilius, interveniunt. And notice that Livy is using the present tense here, interveniunt, to make his narrative a bit more vivid and direct. Then after the semicolon, we have an ablative absolute. So via data, with a path having been given. And que, of course, means and. So, and with a path having been given, amid the crowd, inter turbam. And I added in my translation, I put a path had been given to them, but that doesn't appear in the Latin. So, with a path having been given to them amid the crowd. And now we're going to be told why the crowd allowed these two men through. Cum multitudo, since the crowd, and the verb, so you've got cum plus subjunctive, and the subjunctive verb is crederet, which means believed. So since the crowd believed, that Appius, Appia, was able, posse, there's our infinitive, to be resisted, resisti, present passive infinitive, to be resisted maxime, most effectively, most easily, by the intervention of Isilius, interventu Icili. So here, the word, where are we? The word interventu is ablative, because it means by the intervention, and Icili here is genitive of Isilius. Now, the one thing that's a bit strange here, right, the crowd believed that something was the case. So we go into indirect statement, and you would expect accusative and infinitive. Instead of that, what you get is dative and infinitive. So appio is dative, and posse is the infinitive. And this is a kind of exception to the normal rule about indirect statement, because the verb credere always takes the dative case. So that's why instead of accusative and infinitive, you have dative and infinitive. Okay, so while all that's going on, and then the subject here is lictor, and we'll talk about the lictor in a moment. The lictor says, ait, that's just like inquit or dicit, he says. And then you have this very compressed indirect statement, de cresse. And this is short for, it's an abbreviation of, de cretum esse. So the lictor says that it has been decreed. In other words, he says that the case is settled. So the lictor is saying, look, calm down, there's no point making a fuss because it's too late, the judge has already made his decision. Okay, so the lictor says that it, and again, we have to supply a noun here, the case or something, has been decided, decretum esse, and the lictor submovet, he moves away the vociferantem icilium, the protesting Isilius. So vociferantem is a present participle. Okay. And yeah, just to say one thing about this sentence, which is about the lictor. What is a lictor? Basically, a lictor is an officer whose job was that they attended a magistrate, like a consul or something like that. So the lictor is working for Appius, and the lictor carried the fasces, F-A-S-C-E-S, fasces, which are rods and axes, which symbolized the authority of the magistrate. So the lictor carried the objects which symbolized Appius's authority. And also the lictor was important because if Appius proclaimed a sentence upon someone, like, they had to pay a fine or they had to go into exile, the lictors would enforce that. The lictors would make sure that that happens. So that's the job. Okay. And then moving into the next sentence here, the subject is tam atrox injuria. And tam means such, so much. So such a cruel injustice, tam atrox injuria, accendisset, would have incensed, would have fired up, pluperfect subjunctive, because it's a sort of unreal verb, it would have happened. So such a cruel injustice would have incensed even, quoque, a placidum ingenium, even a placid or even a gentle character. So even a very gentle person would have been enraged by this situation. And as we will see, Isilius is not a placidus sort of person. He is quite fierce, actually. And then we'll see that here. So inquit, he said, Appius, right? Appi is the vocative form. So Appius. Submovendus sum. Now this is what we call a gerundive of obligation. So what you get is the verb to be, a gerundive, and then a dative. So literally, I am to be removed for you. That's the literal meaning. I am to be removed for you. And less literally, that means you have to remove me. Okay. The most famous example of this is something which the statesman Cato used to say while Rome was at war with Carthage. He used to say, Carthago nobis delenda est. The literal meaning is Carthage is to be destroyed for us. Or, of course, the less literal meaning would be we must destroy Carthage. So that's what you have here. So literally, I am to be removed for you, or you must remove me with ferro, literally with iron, i.e., with a sword. Right? You'll have to take me away by force from here, hinc, in order to feras, literally to carry, we might say to carry out, to do, to accomplish, in order to carry out quod vis, that which you wish to be hidden. Celari is a present passive infinitive. So in order to carry out that which you wish to be hidden, in silence, tacitum. So tacitum is actually neuter, agreeing with quod, but we could treat it as an adverb, right? In order to carry out silently the thing that you wish to be hidden. So he's saying, look, if you want to get away with this, you're going to have to kill me to shut me up, right? Because otherwise you're not going to be able to do this quietly. And that's his point. And then he says, sum ducturus. So sum means I am, and ducturus is a future participle from ducere. So literally, I am being about to lead. And that's just another way of doing the future. So sum ducturus is another way of saying ducam, I will lead. And then the object, and the ego is the subject, I. The object is hanc virgine, this maiden. And here ducere has the particular meaning of not just leading, but leading into matrimony. Right? So I will marry this maiden, and habiturus sum, I will have a pudicam nuptam. That means a chaste or an undefiled nupta, which is a bride. So he's basically challenging Appius. He's saying, listen, I am going to marry this woman, and, I'm going to marry her undefiled. In other words, I'm going to marry her without her having slept with anyone else. So he is objecting to the idea that she should now go home with Marcus, the other guy. Okay, so let's go on a bit to the next page. He then says, proinde, that means so, or therefore. Therefore, convoca, that's an imperative, call together, omnes lictores, all the lictors of your colleagues, collegarum, of the other decemvirs, basically. That's genitive plural. And then quoque means something like also or as well. So call together all the lictors of your colleagues as well. And then we have another imperative, iube, order, virgas et secures, rods and axes, to be prepared, expediri, present passive infinitive. So he's basically saying, do your worst. Bring as many lictors as you want, get your rods and axes, which are the symbols of your authority, do whatever you want, but I'm not going to let you get away with this. Okay? And he then says, the subject in the next bit is sponsa ikili, the bride or fiancé of Isilius. Yeah, the fiancé of Isilius, non manebit, will not stay, extra domum patris, outside the house of her father. And when he says non manebit, he really means she won't stay the night. That's what he's talking about. Okay, and then he says known, right? No. And then he says, see, and then the main verb is all the way down here, adelistis. If you have removed, right? If you have removed for the Roman plebs, for the Roman masses, so this phrase is dative, right? So if you have removed for the Roman people, or in English we might say from the Roman people, the literally tribunician help, the help of the tribunes. So this tribunicium, this is actually an adjective, right, agreeing with auxilium. So if you have removed for the Roman people the tribunician help and provocationem, that means the right to appeal. And then he describes these two things, the help of the tribunes and the right of appeal, as duas arches, two strongholds, tuendae libertatis, of guarding, of defending liberty. Right, so if you have done, even if you've managed to do that, nonetheless, right, and then the subject in this next bit is actually regnum, right? So rule or dominion of, or dominion in liberos nostros, dominion over our nostros, our children, and wives, conjugesque, datum est, right, has not been given for that reason, idea, for that reason, to your lust, vestrae libidini. So that's another dative case. Okay. And datum est is negative because we have known right at the beginning of the sentence. So he's basically saying, you know, just because this has happened, you know, just because you've been able to get rid of the tribunes, and just because you've got rid of the right to appeal against laws, doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want to our wives and our children. That's his basic point. Okay, and you can see why. I mean, the right of appeal is important for liberty, right? It gives the common people the right to, you know, object if a law is passed that they don't like, and in particular the role of the tribune, right? A tribune is someone who is a magistrate whose role is to speak up for the common people, right? Like as I said the other day, someone who represents the union, a workers' union, in a place like in a school or in a hospital or wherever it might be. So that's why he says these are, you know, you've removed two strongholds of liberty. Okay. Now, one other thing about the grammar here, you would think that libertatis should be accusative, libertatem, because it's the object of defending, it's the object of tuendi. In fact, what you have here is something called gerundive attraction, where basically the noun libertatis has been attracted into the case of the verb. So instead of saying two strongholds of guarding liberty, the whole phrase has become genitive, like two strongholds of liberty guarding, or something like that. Okay, and then let's go on. The next sentence begins with an imperative, saeviter, that's an imperative that means rage, or something like that. Rage in tergum et in cervices nostras. Rage against our nostras, rage against our back and against our necks. Okay, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Rage against our back and necks. In Latin, tergum is singular, but in English it would make more sense in the plural. And then he says, their chastity, pudicitia, presumably that means the chastity of the wives and children, let it be, sit, present subjunctive. So let their chastity at least, saltem, let their chastity at least be in tuto, in safety, in a safe condition. And in English, we would just say, let it be safe. So he's basically saying, do whatever you want to us, men, but don't touch our women and children. And the reference to the backs and the necks, I think, is because the back is the place where you would be whipped or beaten, and the neck is where you put, a yoke if someone is enslaved, right? So he's saying, beat us on the back, put our necks into, chains or whatever, but leave the women and children alone. Right? That's his point.